Man, I don't even know what time it is. Hi, everyone. Oh, it's bad news. All right. So, welcome to our first annual New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association meeting. Woo! Yay! We have a PowerPoint. The agenda's in the PowerPoint. We'll talk about the stuff that we've done.
You can follow along on your.
If you want to follow on the PowerPoint, it's online. We'll talk about the stuff that we've done this year, and we will talk about some of the future of what the industry might look like in New York with the new hemp extracts law that was passed, and we'll get into some adult use topics, and then we'll have an open discussion about what happened this year and what we can do to help solve some of those problems on the policy and regulatory side for the upcoming growing season. So yeah, let's go through the slides. I wanted to review them before this, but then I didn't have time.
Could you go back so I can get that website one more time?
Yeah, it's nycgpa.org/NOFA.
Thank you.
All right, so this is the agenda, so we'll have plenty of time to talk. All right, next slide. All right, so this is our mission, the New York State Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. It's an industry association that represents farmers, processors, and other businesses in cannabis. We emphasize the importance of environmental sustainability, consumer-conscious practices, and community building in all that we do. Next slide. These are our board members and kind of our founding members of the organization. So I'm Allan, Gandelman, president. I'm a farmer and also a processor. Here today with us we've got Kaelan, who is the vice president of the association and also the CEO of CSG, Castetter Sustainability Group, and they do compliance and other things for the hemp industry. Andrew Rosner, the other vice president from Botanica. Andrew's a hemp grower in Sullivan County and also happens to be our in-house counsel. And then the people we are missing that couldn't make it is Owen Martinetti from Nature Oil in Music Falls, Ben Dobson from Hudson Hemp in Hudson, New York, and Dan Dolgan from Eaton Hemp and JD Farms. And they are mostly a grain and fiber farm. They have some hemp brands, Eaton Hemp seeds and stuff like that. So we are a 501c6 nonprofit, which means that we are a nonprofit that is allowed to lobby the government versus a 501c3 nonprofit that cannot do that. Just January 2019 is when we were established, so we are 1 year old. We have 6 active board members that I just showed you, and we're all owner-operators in New York State. And mostly we are only focused on New York State issues that are affecting our grower members and our processor members, the consumers. But we are obviously always paying attention to USDA stuff and working with Chuck Schumer's office on some different banking issues and other things that affect us on the national level. Next slide. All right, so some of the stuff that we did in our first year in existence, we spent a lot of time building relationships with people at the state level. Donna Lepardo, who's the assembly, in the assembly, she's the chair of the agriculture committee. Senator Metzger, who's the chair of the agriculture committee on the Senate side. We spent a lot of time meeting and talking with them as they were the ones who eventually sponsored the hemp extracts bill. The New York State Agriculture Commissioner Richard Ball and his whole team, and Governor Cuomo's office, who has a cannabis, quote-unquote, cannabis czar that is now dealing with all issues of hemp extracts and potential adult use legislation that's coming up. And we've gotten a ton of press this year, from videos to journal articles, editorials. It was a really big year in hemp, and we had a really good voice. We also have a lobbyist who is not here today, but he's based out of Syracuse, and he has been really instrumental in helping us build these relationships with a lot of our government officials, as well as connecting us to media outlets across the state to get our kind of story heard.
Who is that hemp czar that you mentioned?
So the new one, his name is Norman Birnbaum. He comes from Rhode Island, working in the cannabis industry there, and so he's just stepped into the new position in New York as of like a few weeks ago. Luckily, we got to meet with him like his second week on the job, right after the governor's State of the State last week, and have a really nice long sit down with him and start getting to know each other and building that relationship, and making sure that when he needs answers or questions, or he needs a voice for the hemp industry, that he calls us first. Okay, so on the compliance and regulatory side, I think one of the biggest things that we did this year, a lot of where we spent our time and effort, was the New York Hemp Extracts Bill. That bill, for people who were paying attention last year, when they wanted to do adult use and create the Office of Cannabis Management and regulate THC products and dispensaries and growers, they decided at the time they would lump the hemp CBD growers and the hemp processors and companies into the adult use program. So we were really involved last year, starting January all the way through kind of the whole budgetary season through June, in making sure that the hemp provisions in the law were favorable to us when it came to compliance and testing and labeling requirements, and we can talk some more about those, but also to make sure that in the adult use side, they weren't just going to give our industry away to large corporate cannabis businesses from out of state or out of country. And so that was a really important part of what we were doing last year and what we will be doing this year. So we, in the new extracts bill, written into the bill, it was passed and then signed as a standalone when adult use didn't happen. And so the governor signed it in December. There were some chapter amendments that were made, and now it's gonna be finished in the next week or two during the legislative session, and technically it takes effect May 1st.
Does it have to be voted on?
It's already been, well,
the chapter amendments.
The chapter amendments, yes, but it's generally understood that once the governor signs it, the chapter amendments, it just kind of sails through the voting process, and right now it's made its way through the committees on both sides and should be done in really soon.
So the chapter amendments in the bill and the original bill had kind of a different flavor.
Yes.
The bill was a little more amateurish. The chapter amendments tightened things up a little bit and changed things. Can you speak to who wrote the one and who wrote the other?
Yeah. So, Okay. That's a long story. So, the original bill was when adult use was about to fail at the last literally hour, and everyone's staying up all night seeing if it's going to make it or not in June. Donna Lopardo decided she would take out everything to do with hemp. The hemp section, it was like section 5 or something like that. I can't remember. Take it out and pass it as a standalone. And we were preparing for that the entire time. We didn't want to introduce it as a standalone because the industry consensus was to all come together under the adult use THC side. And so, but we had a plan B, and that was to pass it as a standalone because it would be really hard for them to not pass it as a standalone hemp bill. And so at the last minute, she pulled out that hemp section and passed it as a standalone. Which was
unamended.
Which was the unamended version. So there was an amended version of that hemp bill and an unamended version, like an A and a B. When it got pulled out of the adult use laws, it was the A version for some reason that got passed.
Because the aged.
Yeah, you have to let it sit
Yes.
for a certain amount of time.
3 days it needs to be aged. So the only bill that could go and be sent to the floor was the A version instead of the B version. So that was part of it. So we didn't have a three-way agreement on it. That was part
Right.
of
The
it.
B version had the three-way agreement on it, and had some of the modifications that they then put into the chapter amendments, and more so, actually. The hard part when they start making chapter amendments, it's kind of done behind closed doors. It's not like the part of the writing of the original bill. And so there's definitely some compromises that were made. You know, our whole angle throughout this entire process for the last year was to create an ecosystem in New York State that is like craft beer and favored New York State small and mid-sized farmers when it came to hemp and CBD and eventually adult use. And so we had some protectionist provisions in there that might or might not have worked or gone through. We also had some really strict language, I would say, on some of the regulatory side, on testing and compliance. And when they came through to make the chapter amendments, they actually peeled some of that back because they don't want to have to keep changing the law every year if the program's not working, is their perspective, and they want to be able to do stuff as it goes and make changes. So they left it a little bit more broad in the chapter amendments. You know, some of the things that we're looking at and we know are happening for sure are, like, now there will be an industry advisory panel, which trade organization will be on farmers and processors and government officials, so that's good.
The working group.
It's kind of like the working group that was supposed to be in existence that disappeared. There was a hemp working group that kind of fell off the map. And now that it's in the law, we have to do it. They have to do it. They have to meet it. Can't fall off the radar again. The other thing was labeling. So we had in the bill, every product that is sold in New York State needs to meet labeling requirements. So it needs to have some kind of QR code that leads to a full panel testing per batch or lot number. That you have to have that to sell in New York, whether you're a New York product or an out-of-state product. That's a big one. The product also has to be in compliance with that label. So if it says 1,000 milligrams of CBD on the bottle, it has to have 1,000 milligrams of CBD, because there was instances where Ag and Markets was going into stores and saying, oh, you're selling CBD lollipops. You're not allowed to sell CBD lollipops because you're not allowed to put CBD in food and beverages. And the store owner says to the inspector, hey, guess what? There's no CBD in that lollipop. I just write CBD on it and sell it for $5, haha. And so the Ag and Markets inspectors there's nothing they can do about it because there's no regulation, there's no kind of statute that says a store can't do that, because there's literally zero labeling requirements because the FDA hasn't issued its supplement ruling. And so that's happening across the state, as I'm sure everyone knows. So that is now New York State standard that what's actually on the bottle has to be or on the label has to be in the product. I know these things seem so simple, but somehow they're not. Also, the product, that has to be labeled, and this is where there's some room for later improvements, but has to be either a growing region or the state the product was grown and made, or country. So if we're seeing a lot of, let's say, hemp coming in from other countries and then turned into products in the States or New York and being sold under the covers, kind of like a grown and made in New York State product, that's not allowed. And that's kind of one of the ways we're trying to start differentiating the market, so people know where their hemp is actually coming from. Testing, we're full panel testing, potency, metals, pesticides, micro bacteria testing. Everything for New York State standard has to be made in a GMP facility, and everything now sold in New York State has to be made in a GMP facility. So if people in Colorado are only making their hemp products in food grade facilities and then trying to sell them in New York, technically they're not allowed to do that. So they'll have to meet those kind of stricter standards of manufacturing and extraction. Also, in terms of consumer transparency, every retailer that is going to sell a hemp extract product in New York State now needs to register to New York that they are selling hemp extract products in their store. And their reasoning for this was now the inspectors know where to go and start checking labels just like they do with alcohol. I think they randomly show up to test alcohol percentage to stores.
And does that go into effect 2021 January along with the licensing?
No, May 1st.
It should be going into effect May 1st. Now there's a caveat that we'll talk about on that. But the other big change that happened was hemp extracts, as was governed by Department of Ag and Markets. They just couldn't do it. They don't have enough inspectors. I mean, for any of you, the growers out here, it was very difficult for them to even do our compliance testing in the field. So in the new bill, now Ag and Markets is in charge of inspecting the fields, like the hemp, the CBD crop, grain fiber in the field. But once it goes into processing, everything from processing onto the shelf is all now in the New York State Department of Health. So the New York State Department of Health is already responsible for all of the registered medical marijuana organizations in terms of inspections and compliance and licensing. So now they're going to take our extract industry and put it under the Department of Health umbrella. However, the caveat is if adult use passes this year by this April 1st budget, which is why our bill doesn't take effect till May 1st, because we should know by April 1st on adult use. If the adult use bill passes, the adult use bill creates a whole nother government agency called the Office of Cannabis Management. If the Office of Cannabis Management gets created in the near future, all of hemp extracts, medical marijuana, and adult use all now go into one government agency.
But growing stays with Ag and Markets?
But growing hemp stays with Ag and Markets. Growing THC will probably go into the Office of Cannabis Management.
So in other words, the first part of the chapter amendments holds, and the second part will be replaced.
No. Where just those assigned tests, the DOH will go over to the Office of Cannabis Management.
33, Article 33.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever Department of Health is going to regulate, it'll go over to the Office of Cannabis Management. And there's another reason behind that too, is because the team that is regulating medical marijuana will probably a lot of them will transfer over to the Office of Cannabis Management.
And so our kind of goal on the bigger picture, long-term thinking as an association was that, I think you could switch to the next slide, I can't remember. So our goal as an association and the bigger picture was that the infrastructure the New York State farmers have in terms of their growing operations, your processing, your brands, all of it for hemp extracts and CBD should be the first people to get the licenses to do adult use. New York State will need 1 million pounds of THC being grown in the first year to meet the market demand, is what their estimates are. Those aren't our estimates, that's Department of Health, I think, estimates. So our pitch to the state is now that we have tighter regulations, we have the testing, we have the processing, we have the GMP, now if there's adult use, instead of giving these licenses to the out-of-state giant behemoth companies who are multi-state operators,
I don't even need to do this.
give them to the small and mid-sized farmers in New York who have already had a couple years experience growing hemp and have the experience processing extracts and manufacturing products with them. Let us and let the medical marijuana companies first try to meet the market demand to the ramp up instead of turn out of state. And if we're already regulated under that agency and we're already used to the inspectors and we're already in compliance, then we should be kind of at the front of the line. And so even though we sometimes cringe at regulations, in this case they might help us to achieve those kind of longer term goals.
As long as you get in there before the big money gets in and pushes it away.
Some of the stuff we were pushing for would preclude that. Having, and we'll see the new bill for adult use comes out probably next week. And some of the things we've been pushing for is like, you can't have a company that's more than 51% owned by out-of-state entities operating in the adult use market in New York. And those kinds of provisions.
And the cap on vertical integration.
There's also, and a cap on vertical integration. So there's some stuff in there that would prevent that happening. And whenever we meet with the legislators or whoever, government officials, our pitch is always like, we want to create 1,000 millionaire farmers, $1,000 million companies across New York State instead of $1 billion behemoth.
Right.
And that's been the pitch all along. We always point to the craft beer industry and say, do that for us. And so that's been received very, very well.
Were you guys responsible for putting the grinding and trimming in the growing, in the grower's license?
Remember. On the chapter amendments?
Yeah.
I mean, these kind of discussions come up all the time. So what we do is we try to inform the regulators. But yeah, definitely, at what point does processing start?
Yeah.
And Department of Health takes over, and we've definitely had an input on it.
The tax policy stuff, we won't get into, but the tax policy on the adult use, the way it was written last year, would be so prohibitive that that would have just put us all in a huge disadvantage in terms of economies of scale, being smaller, having higher cost of production, plus those 30 to 40% taxes on top would going to be insane. So we're trying to now also revise some of the tax stuff for adult use. How do I switch this?
There you go.
All right, so this is the last. All right.
It's kind of cut off at the bottom, but
I was going to say something else. Now I forgot. The smokable flower part, that was left out of the chapter amendments because Ag and Markets has their head in the sand about that one. They just don't want to deal with it because they want to deal with it when adult use happens. What to do with smokable flower, what the regulations are, what labeling requirements, what testing requirements. And so they didn't want to come out with the whole system for hemp and then in 3 months pass a whole new law for adult use and have to go back and redo it all. Yeah.
Just on the tax policy there, because it seems things are getting aggregated. So New York State's requiring CBD products to be manufactured as dietary supplements.
Yeah.
Dietary supplements are not subject to sales tax in New York State.
No.
Do you think there's some implications as these all get put under the same umbrella where they may impose some sort of a tax structure there?
That's a really good question.
Probably not at point of sale.
Yeah, it wouldn't be at point of sale for CBD products because it's just at the grocery store. If they're sold through dispensaries, I know it's a great question.
Yeah, ideally, I'd like to see it through the licensing and
right.
The
And
licensing is the taxes.
Yeah.
We've proposed. Unfortunately, they want to charge higher licensing fees to cover these costs of now 500 growers and inspectors and testing at the state level. And we proposed some licensing fee structures that basically the bigger growers pay more. The bigger processors just pay more. It's hard to do it any other way at this very point. Down the line, I'm sure we could revise it, but right now that's the easiest way to at least start.
Yeah, so they give us a $5 million fill. So there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that it's hard to communicate in live time. And so, they proposed a $5 million fiscal score on the hemp extract bill. And so we had to get around that because it was outside the budgetary process and propose new ways that they can add revenue. So the retail licensing, and so, what's important is we were trying to pass the hemp extract bill and we worked all, session long and worked really hard. So at the hemp roundtable sent out some very misleading information attacking the bill, and a lot of people who we depend on for your support in terms of growers and retailers, etc., came out and spread these mistruths on social media and really made it a lot more difficult for us to do our job. And one of the things that to clear up is that, in the bill they didn't put the licensing numbers on, how much it will cost for each license, and that was intentional, and that was to leave it open so that we could continue to push back against all these things that could have made this bill fail, and the fiscal note being a big part of it, and saying, okay, well, if there's 20,000 retailers in New York State and 5,000 of them end up getting this registration, and they all pay a $500 registration fee, that's X amount of revenue, and this and that. So we had to work through that in order to get the Department of Budget to check off on it. Department of Budget, and there's codes committees, there's all these committees that can kill a bill even after it's been passed and keep the government from signing it.
Yeah, and that's what took so long for the governor to sign it, is the fiscal implications of the bill. When Kaelan says $5 million, that's what Ag and Markets said. For them to follow through on the bill that got passed and actually implement it and regulate it and inspect it was going to cost them $5 million, and they didn't have $5 million. So they kept pushing the governor to not sign the bill and not do this because they couldn't afford it.
Can I propose we tax the brokers?
Yeah. Yes.
That would be amazing.
Tax
and that's a whole other thing that isn't even.
So brokers will have to get
licensed.
To get a license.
Yeah, brokers in New York should have to be able to get a license. And there's one other thing I want to talk about. I almost forgot the food and beverage part of extracts. It was we pushed really hard for food and beverages for CBD extracts, and over the summer sometime we thought we had come to a compromise, and the compromise was that All right, we'll agree that no CBD for this round is allowed in food. No randomly putting CBD in muffins or, donuts at the bagel shop. It's hard to test, it's hard to dose. But what we did want to see was that CBD extracts would be allowed in beverages and sealed beverages in containers, not dropped in at the coffee shop, because again, there could be mistakes being made in terms of dosing. And the Department of Health and Ag Markets was very concerned about people overdosing and overtaking too much CBD because there's not enough studies according to them. So we compromised on 20 milligrams per sealed beverage. That was in the bill, that specific language, to be manufactured in a CFR 117 food grade facility, because all of our state's beverage manufacturers are meeting those requirements. So we thought that was our little carve out and our little niche to at least get our foot in the door on the beverage side. And when it came down to the last hour, literally, of negotiating chapter amendments, they took the beverage piece out. And they kind of ignored it. They left the CFR 117 in as a strange potential loophole. And so we don't...
De minimis. So basically it says when the CBD is added at de minimis, something that can be defined later on. Mm-hmm. And then they also, as in the research partner agreement, you can produce food and beverage under the dietary supplement framework, which is somewhat confusing, and it really just leads to how you're going to label it, how you manufacture, how small you manufacture, etc.
And then we get into this situation where if the FDA is saying technically CBD isn't a supplement, but New York's saying now it is a supplement, and then, depending on what size company you have, you're starting to expose yourself to federal risk, even if you're not exposing yourself to New York State risk. It's starting to get into that, adult use cannabis, medical marijuana side, like it's a states thing, but then the DEA is still like randomly busting people, so that's where things start getting a little bit foggy.
Well, that's the next question, because if we go under cannabis management, then we're in with marijuana, which is illegal at the federal level, and the states have broken away. Would that then get us out from under the USDA guidelines?
It could, but then you're leaving yourself up to liability for shipping the product out.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is. It's a double-edged sword.
But it's open for consideration.
I think that when we have these discussions with the governor's office and everyone else, they always love floating the idea that once we are regulated under the Office of Cannabis Management, well, guess what? You guys can grow 1%, 2% THC crops and sell them in dispensaries, and all of a sudden there might be some more options on that side, and the hemp is still the hemp. So,
and I think when they were actually doing that, we were still waiting for the USDA to come out with its regulations. So this was the way also the state was looking at the situation and saying, we could actually protect you under the hemp extract portion of the OCM by changing the regulations by adopting regulations that are different than what the USDA is requiring. So this was something that they were sort of playing with at the time.
Yeah.
And still might be considered.
Right. And it could now be an actual possibility where the New York State ecosystem of hemp, extract, CBD, THC is that, a closed loop ecosystem. Especially if the FDA comes out and says no more CBD in supplements, which we don't expect them to, but the way they're going, who knows what they're going to really come out with in the next year or two. And then we'd still be protected under the OCM. So we're trying to straddle both sides right now, and only, it's kind of a hurry up and wait situation. But we're trying to plan for the future and predict it.
Slight tack. What has been said, or where are we at with fiber with him?
We don't really deal much on the fiber side.
So you guys only deal with the
extracts for the most part. The fiber.
Dan's just not here.
Our fiber guy is not, our grain fiber guy isn't here. But I mean, we pay attention to it. But fiber was easy. That's ag and markets. It's an easy lift. There's no real regulatory compliance on that because the chances of that going hot on THC is so slim, and you're not extracting anything from fiber. So the fiber and grain have their own processing licenses, and those still will be regulated under ag and markets. It's only the extract people growing, the high CBD, feminized genetics for processing. That's the processing side that gets into the
So it's like green light with fiber?
None of the regulations, so specifically we made sure that none of the regulations in the hemp extract bill apply to either products grown for industrial use or grown as to be used as a grass ingredient. So that covers food and fiber. The one issue that I guess would be on my radar and the association's radar for fiber is zoning regulations and code regulations at the state level, fire regulations. And we do know some operators that have run into some issues, some confusing issues around fiber. And really, I guess what our approach is trying to delineate fiber and grain as much as possible from regulations involving hemp extracts, right? So, you know, the code and zoning regulations for hemp extracts should have nothing to do with fiber and grain, and then educating those agencies to understand the difference and the delineations. And then the other issue is pollination, something that we have tackled or tried to tackle and have brought up. Like markets really doesn't want to deal with it. So, in my opinion, I think it's a county and municipal issue, and something that counties and municipalities can start to tackle. But you know, anything that's going to tell someone what they can and cannot grow is going to be get decided for. You know.
So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, federally, this week in the House, there was the Peterson bill presented, so it's gonna give the option or flexibility for the FDA to actually allow CBD products to be approved as dietary supplements.
Yes, not food products, just dietary supplements.
But it was only CBD, right?
Yeah.
Just CBD.
Only said
Right, they didn't say
that's
extracts.
That's a flaw.
Right, they need to change the language. But we've called Senator Schumer's office and we've asked if they would be introducing the same bill in the Senate side. And so they're going to look at that. And he's very interested in helping the hemp industry in New York. So it kind of gets us into the next thing, the prospects for adult use in 2020. One of the things when we talk about pollen, but kind of the right to farm laws. Ag markets got a lot of complaints this year about the smell of hemp and CBD all over the state.
Especially in high-income areas.
Especially, in the higher income areas, the Long Island suburbs and the Westchester areas and all that stuff. Nicer neighborhoods.
It's always an acquired smell.
So, we always say, look, it's better than the manure spreading smell. So here's where some of the stuff comes in terms of right to farm laws with what we're doing and potentially adult use. It's a decent segue. Is that right now we're allowed to stink up the neighborhood. Farmers. They can complain all they want, but there's nothing ag markets can do about it. It's a right to farm state. And when the adult use bill comes in, and when some of us want to grow outdoor, sun-grown, organic, THC cannabis, it's going to smell. And we don't want the neighbors to be able to complain and stop that from happening. So one of the parts in the adult use bill is there is a right to farm, exclusion in there to make sure that ag market law carries over to the adult use cannabis side. So that's one of the things we're looking at: the licensing, canopy limitations, and also direct-to-consumer sales from farmers. Making sure that if you're a farmer and you're growing a craft product, you can sell your product to the end consumer, and maybe even potentially have a license for on-site consumption, just like in craft beer. So if you have a growing operation, you can come in and have some kind of
So that would
coffee
be the
shop.
exception to the restriction on vertical integration.
Yes.
And micro licenses.
There would be a micro licensing program.
And that was in the CRTA.
Yes, that one was in the CRTA last year, and hopefully it'll be in the CRTA again this year. If not, we will fight really hard to get that back in there.
I like that. We run a music festival. It'll work out great.
So do we. We also run a music festival. So this is probably a bunch of people in here running music festivals.
Agritourism on it.
Or will be.
Or will be. 180-day music festival. Yes, that sounds entire.
Just one quick one on the right to farm stuff.
Yeah.
So I preemptively, I'm in Suffolk County on
Yeah.
Long Island. Preemptively, I've talked to the town, county officials, and it's clear, they're very pro hemp because it is an agricultural commodity. They do not see marijuana as the same. So just as a suggestion, as you move through this
Yes.
policy, one of the best ways to get those protections is to ensure that it is considered an agricultural commodity,
Yes.
not another
That
class.
is exactly what we're trying to pass in regulations.
It's tough though, because it is a controlled substance, right?
Yeah.
So this is an issue that is kind of above our focus, which is the whole municipality ability to opt out.
Oh, yeah.
That is above,
Yeah.
It's above our pay grade.
that's above us. It's something that we don't want to get involved in necessarily. And also, unfortunately, we do have a bias towards upstate just because the vast majority of operators are in upstate, right? And so kind of our, thinking, and well, specifically mine, is that, if downstate is going to be the reason why we can't get the bill done, and that's why we didn't get the adult use bill done last year, quite frankly, then and they don't want the tax revenues, that's fine, but don't starve that opportunity, economic opportunity from upstate New York, right? So we would move towards this. Our opinion is, if they want to opt out, if Suffolk and Nassau kind of want to opt out,
Unfortunately.
they can do so.
But I think that one of the things that one of the things that's important to pay attention to, I think, is that if there's counties that are looking to opt out, you're not necessarily abandoned by the association. So
Yeah.
we would, if there's some level at the county if there's a negotiation taking place at the county level around what they're going to actually permit in terms of growing, that's something that we could also get behind.
Yeah.
So there might be a splitting of the baby. It might not be necessarily outdoor grow. I mean, there might be things that they're looking for in order to get it through their, with their local constituents.
Well, and also from a dispensing side, right? So let's be realistic here. Adult use also adds opportunity. There's a lot more medical access for people who need cannabis. When we talk about adult use, it's not just like alcohol, where alcohol is not used as something medicinally, right? So if we have counties and large swaths of areas where you're unable to access cannabis that you need, that's a problem. That's a problem that not only we're concerned about, but also the Drug Policy Alliance and the whole coalition of groups that are supporting adult use, right? And so in my opinion, if a county is going to move that, it should not be a unilateral political decision by a county executive. It should have to go for a referendum.
Yes. So, I mean, look, I think, I'm just going to make the membership pitch real quick.
How do you join?
So, we all want you as members. We have a good board, the people we work with directly as processors and growers, but it's strength in numbers at this point. And the more people now we have as members of our association, the more we can have an impact in Albany and at that state level, especially having members from downstate. Most of our groups, like you saw, we're all in the upstate counties. We need more downstate members, whether they're people in the city, whether they're people in Long Island or Westchester. Those things are going to be really, really important, especially over the next 2 months as we're kind of negotiating this adult use bill. So to sign up, you can go online to nycgpa.org. There's a sign-up form. There's a fee. The money goes to mostly paying our lobbyist. Lobbying is really expensive, believe it or not. But in Albany, it is kind of a pay-to-play operation. And so without that, they don't listen to you. And it sucks, but that's just the reality of Albany. So that's where almost all of our funding.
Well, not just that, they actually can't listen to you. So,
Also,
Yeah, that's-
so
also
there's
that.
ethics rules that prevent you from being able to advocate without registering as a lobbyist, right? So
Yes.
these
Yeah.
rules are meant to keep transparency open so you can see everyone's lobbying activities, but it also makes it so you have to either register as a lobbyist yourself and really spend all that money, pretty much hire someone to do your compliance for you, or hire a lobbyist. And then also, to be fair to our lobbyists too, there's a lot of helpful, not necessarily that, someone won't take a meeting with you, but these personal relationships matter, right? And, I think that a lot, from the outside, a lot of people and the press like to, throw the word corruption around, et cetera, but the reality is that we're all people and we're all going to, react differently towards personal relationships, right? So if you have that personal relationship, it's easier to open up that door and get the specific meetings, right? It's not that these regulators might not want to meet with someone, if they have, they have 40 hours in a week, right? They can only do so many things. So if they have, we have a legitimacy behind us with a lobbyist that helps. But that being said, most of the governor's office and legislators that we deal with, they do listen to us, but it's just like, if we advocate for policy, we need to have our lobbyists sitting next to us. Like, it's just a law.
I mean, I will say that we went to the governor's state of the state, and as soon as it was over, we were meeting with Norm, the New York State's brand new cannabis czar, and starting to hash out policy. And our lobbyist got us that meeting. And I've talked to other lobbyists, other hemp companies in the industry who Norm won't even return their calls right now. And we were sitting in front of him, the three of us, after the governor's state of the state, like first day on the job. And so those are super powerful, really important, because now when he has questions or policy things are coming up, we get those phone calls and emails. And so it is huge to have that.
And also when we think of, you know, the ROs, registered organizations, last year at the end there was a very tenuous, you know, kind of coalition that came together with the ROs. We were not necessarily part of that coalition because we do see them as an adversary in a lot of ways, right? And so,
who are they?
So the ROs there's 9 of them, and that's like Acreage Holdings, Columbia Care, Vireo Health,
PharmaCann,
MedMen. They're MSOs, so they're multi-state operators. They have a lobbyist. Our lobbyist goes toe-to-toe with their lobbyist every time. So it's important that we're able to counter them, right? Because they'll come in, they'll try to affect something real quick. Our lobbyist will know about it because he was a former Cuomo administration guy, and so he'll find out about it, let us know, and we're able to counter it. You know, with a small, I mean, there's 5 of us, you know, we're six now.
board members.
And so, you know, for us to be able to do that, we do need someone in. And our lobbyist is Park Strategy, so that's Joe Rossi, former Senator Automato, right? And Automato, you know, his character is, you know, he's a bulldog, so we need to get something done. Sometimes it gets all the way up to the senator. The senator's met Allan a couple times, right? And he goes and pushes and gets it done. So, you know, in a lot of ways it's a lot of money, but in some instances it is money well spent.
It is absolutely money well spent, but we do need to build our membership to fund that stuff and also to just have a much bigger voice, and that gets us.
You can also pay for membership at our table at the trade show as well.
It's generally $500 for the year, and that'll get you a button. So if you want a super expensive button,
there's more though. I mean,
there's more.
Yeah, there is. We're putting.
Yes,
I mean, we're putting out white papers and memos. 'Cause, you know, we were really intimately involved in creating this legislation. You know, so we know what's coming down the pike, and we're preparing to help all of our members navigate the situation, you know, in real time.
And that's the last 2 bullets. You know, we have some time left. We can talk about questions, answer policy ideas, or things that you would like to see us as like a dues-paying member. What you would like to see an association like ours doing for the cannabis community.
And actually, one other thing is that we want to actually set up a subcommittee system
Yes.
as part of the association, so that it's not just the board members that are going in and actually meeting with legislators and actually being very active on the front lines, but it's everybody in the room. So the subcommittees are active in the conversation. They're actually going out and advocating for the areas that they specialize in, and that we also all as a group stay very much on top of the issues. And you know, as a small board, we've done, I think, a fairly good job, but there's a lot coming down the pipe with the MRTA.
Yeah, and it happens quickly, so if we can rely on other people to do some of that work, it really helps us out, because we all have our own businesses that we have to run so we can pay the lobbyists.
Things happen very, very quickly, and there's literally been times when we will get a heads-up phone call from someone in the government saying, hey, just so you know, Ag Markets is about to go from Delta 9 to THCA, and they're not telling anyone. And it's like, oh shit, we better get into like action and get rolling on this. And then within a week, all of a sudden, Ag Markets is sticking to Delta 9, and they're not going to go to THCA, total THC testing for the year. And all of a sudden, that's done. You know, but without a group like ours having the heads up, and without people in the government knowing who to call to say, this is going to be a shit show. This is going to be a huge problem.
Assemblywoman Donald Pardo, she has put she puts her neck out on the line, puts a lot of political capital out for us all the time.
Yes.
She'll make calls. She has destroyed relationships with regulators over concerns that we have.
Like the Delta 9.
Delta 9, licensing,
Yeah.
opening up that license period. I mean, there's a lot of things that, and so as a member too, you know, you come to us with these concerns, you know, we do advocate and we, you know, we've done it before for people even outside our membership where, you know, this is a problem that I'm facing personally, what can you do? And we can, and we're well respected. You know, we sat down with Commissioner Ball at the end of last year and all his deputies that were instrumental in this regulation and hashed out a lot of issues. And, you know, they trust us and they trust that we're speaking on behalf of the industry that's represented in this room and not the industry that's represented in boardrooms across the United States and on Wall
They
Street
see you as
and
that.
Toronto.
Yeah.
They did, so like
They
you made the
understand that.
comparison between like the beer, you know.
The craft beer.
The craft beer,
Yeah.
and so they
Yes.
see you in that same
Yeah.
light.
They
It's
see
like
us
we're the
kind-
farmers, we're the
Yes.
people who actually.
Yeah.
100%.
Right.
And they don't want to cause us harm, and a lot of times they don't understand that a simple wording change in a bill will cause us harm and potentially cause us to destroy 20% of the crops. And how they sample and how they test and what you know when they're doing it. So they're bureaucrats, right? They're just following the thing and.
But a
we
lot
have
of
to
them are civil
explain-
servants who
Yeah,
want to
they're
do the
civil
right thing.
servants. They
Yeah.
want to do the right thing. The inspectors are fine. We've had no problems, but they just don't know. They're not experts. The legislators aren't experts. Dawn is amazing, but she is in no way even close to an expert hemp grower, someone who's been doing it and really understands the industry. So they really rely on us to come to them and tell them like this is the effects of this language. And
Yeah.
sometimes like 3 words in a sentence can make or break an entire bill.
And the reality is when we do sit down with lawmakers who are not in our district, they do listen, but they're really, I mean, at the end of the day, they're focused on their district, right? So if we can reach out to members and go, hey, this is your legislator, there's some problems here, they're a maybe right now, we meet them on a yes, harass them, tell all your friends to call up their office, that really helps. And
Works.
at the end, with that hemp extract bill, we had members that were
Yeah.
able to call up certain key lawmakers in their district and push them. That was big. And so with downstate too, the reality is Westchester, Long Island killed the adult use bill last year. So they were going to look to kill it again this year. And so, we need as much support in those areas as possible, but also rural areas too. I mean, on the hemp side, the reality is that it was near unanimous in the Assembly and it was unanimous in the Senate. This is a Republican and Democrat issue, and the Republicans listen to rural voters, and so do vulnerable Democrats in upstate communities. Well, every lawmaker and elected representative is hyper aware of is that a vote in a rural district is worth more than a vote in an urban district because of the way that it's
Where the numbers run.
yeah, the way the numbers run. It's just the math. So in those rural districts, there's a lot of power that farmers have.
Yep. And one meeting and one phone call does make a difference, because sometimes a farmer will call a downstate legislator, and then all of a sudden we'll get a phone call, hey, a farmer called me about this issue. Is this a real issue?
Mm-hmm.
And they're checking up and following up, because not a lot of people reach out to their local government officials. So, question or?
I'm sorry, I came in late. Can you tell me your structure? Are you a trade association, C3, C4?
We are a 501c6. Yeah. So we are a lobbying trade association.
And also you have the membership for businesses at 500. Do you have associates that can be as informational members or something?
Yeah,
$100 a
I think
year.
there's a $100 a year membership for
Supporters.
Supporters.
I mean, you would still be like a member. You could participate in committees, but what we're looking for here is for the industry to come together and recognize that if we don't speak with one voice, the guys at the top, it's easier for them to speak with one voice because they've consolidated the industry. So we're really working to organize this community and build an industry that, at the end of the day, part of the reason why the regulators and the legislators listen to us is because they know that we're not out to eat their lunch. you know, but when they sit down across from one of these big cannabis businesses, you know, they're trying to kill them, you know, so they can actually trust that our advice is legitimate, that we're looking out for, you know, the best interests of New York State.
Yeah. So we're pretty much getting to the end. So let's answer a couple more questions. Or
Yeah, just
policy
was curious about where we
concerns.
are with licensing right now in New York State.
I believe CBD growers' licenses are open. Hemp, grain and fiber are open. Processing grain and fiber are open. Processing extracts and CBD are not open until everything settles out with the OCM or the Department of Health. And once
So processing, what about growing? Did I miss it?
yeah, growing is open.
Oh, it is open.
CBD growing is open is the last I checked. Yeah.
So you go New York State.
It's on
Plant
the
industry home.
it's on the Ag and Markets website.
It's the plant industry division,
Yeah.
so you go down to divisions, plant industry division.
I could throw the link up on our Facebook page. That'd be easy enough to do.
Yeah,
Yes, we have a
it's
Facebook
pretty-
page and a Facebook group.
Oh yeah, there is a Facebook page and a Facebook group. Is there another question? Yeah, in the back.
Yes, so I do policy for New York, and we, to the extent that we have the resources, we have a commitment to ensure that our growers can add this to what they're doing, or
Yes.
that growers are those who want to be certified organic. And so we're looking to participate to, as I said, to the extent that we have bandwidth, we are building relationships with both the federal and Mexico.
Awesome.
And official.
Right.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes.
And our policy meeting, it's huge. It's great to have this kind of public
The
forum.
Farm Bureau is also someone,
Yes.
an agency that we work very closely with, and that's unique. So you've got this coalition of cannabis advocates and groups. Some of the most powerful is DPA and NORML. They aren't really looking at these issues. We bring the issues of the growers and the producers to them and to the table there. And then also we bring the Farm Bureau, who's pretty powerful. The Farm Bureau not only supported our hemp extract bill last year, but also the MRTA, the adult use bill. And they did that even though they knew they were going to catch a lot of shit from their members, and they did. But again, this year with their annual meeting, they approved provisions in their statewide that are very progressive on the cannabis side. So they're supporting
Yes.
cannabis wholeheartedly for Farm Bureau.
Yes, and a lot of that comes from us meeting with them and explaining to them what we're doing and who our members are and who we are, so that they're comfortable that they're actually supporting farmers and not, again, just out-of-state companies. Yeah.
Do we know if there's any tie-in with licensing for the CBD growth versus the adult use?
I don't think